Steel hearts beyond the Rhine. When courage defies hatred. The lie. The biting wind of early 1945 cut through the heavy wool of Sergeant James Washington's greatcoat. But the chill that truly settled in his bones was born not of the weather, but of the festering indignities of war. Europe was a canvas of desolation and heroic defiance, a theater where humanity's darkest instincts clashed with its most luminous courage. For James, a black man from rural Alabama, serving in the United States Army meant navigating a war on two fronts: the brutal struggle against Nazi Germany and the insidious ever-present battle against the racism embedded within his own nation's military. Their current staging area, a collection of shelled-out farmhouses near a frozen Belgian field, offered little comfort. Graffiti scrawled on a ruined wall declared Deutschland über alles, a stark reminder of the enemy's fervent, hateful ideology. Across the Rhine, a river they were poised to cross, lay the heart of that ideology. Hitler, in his twisted worldview, had declared black soldiers inherently inferior, incapable of complex thought, lacking the bravery or discipline to stand against his Aryan legion. He'd called them mongrelized and primitive, suggesting their combat effectiveness was non-existent, their very presence a sign of Allied weakness. These were not mere insults. They were a systemic denial of humanity, a lie perpetuated with genocidal intent. Another day, another load of white bread in segregated mess halls, Private Samuel Sam Thompson muttered, chewing slowly on a piece of hardtack that tasted of dust and regret. Sam was a wiry young man from Chicago, barely out of his teens, whose youthful idealism had been swiftly eroded by the grim realities of military service. His eyes, usually bright with quick humor, now held a weary glint. You'd think after fighting through North Africa and Italy, they'd figure out we bleed the same damn color. Corporal Robert Bob Jones, a barrel-chested man with a permanent scowl that belied a fiercely protective nature, grunted in agreement. "They ain't trying to figure it out, Sam. They know. They just don't care." Bob had seen too many good men, black men, die for a country that still treated them as second-class citizens, to hold on to any illusions. He was a veteran of the Great War, and the echoes of its segregation were hauntingly familiar. Sergeant Washington watched his men. He understood their frustration, felt it deep within his own gut. He remembered the posters back home depicting smiling black soldiers, strong and loyal, serving their country. But the reality was a stark contrast: segregated units, often relegated to support roles, denied opportunities for advancement, and constantly undermined by prejudiced white officers. Even when they proved their mettle in combat, the accolades often went elsewhere, or were simply downplayed. The 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, had fought with distinction across France, yet their valor was frequently overlooked in official reports. Their own unit, an infantry company attached to a larger division, had faced similar slight. They were often given the most dangerous deadness, the dirty work, the mop-up operations, the tasks deemed too risky or unpleasant for others. And yet they persevered. They cleaned their rifles with meticulous care, maintained their equipment with pride, and trained relentlessly, not just for their country, but for each other, and for a silent, unspoken purpose: to prove the lie wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Cross, their commanding officer, a man whose dark skin and unwavering gaze commanded respect even from those who might otherwise harbor prejudice, walked past them. Cross was a rarity, a black officer in a position of significant authority. He understood the stakes better than anyone. He carried the weight of every black soldier's reputation on his shoulders, knowing that one failure, one perceived weakness, would be used to validate the enemy's grotesque narrative. He stopped, his eyes sweeping over Washington's squad. "Sergeant Washington, I want your men ready for the push. Word is the crossing is imminent." His voice was low, gravelly, but carried an undeniable authority. "This isn't just about taking ground, Sergeant. This is about taking back our name." James nodded, his jaw tight. "We understand, sir." He did. Every man in his unit understood. They were fighting for liberation abroad, but also for recognition at home. They were fighting to dismantle not just the Third Reich, but also the insidious mythology of racial inferiority. Hitler's propaganda machine churned out images and rhetoric, depicting black people as cowardly, unintelligent, and unfit for warfare. It was a vicious lie, designed to demoralize and divide. But for James and his men it was a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge they were determined to meet with unparalleled courage and skill. He recalled a passage his grandmother, a devout woman, used to read from her worn Bible: "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." Exodus, he thought, or Deuteronomy. The exact chapter mattered less than the unwavering truth it conveyed. Strength in the face of fear, courage when surrounded by hate. It resonated deeply. They were on their own, often unsupported, facing an enemy that despised them and a system that undervalued them. Yet they had to be strong. They had to be courageous, because beyond the physical victory, there was a moral victory to be won, a testament to their humanity that would echo far beyond the battlefields of Europe. The lie had to be shattered, not just with bullets, but with undeniable acts of heroism. If you're inspired by stories of courage overcoming prejudice, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold history. The atmosphere in the makeshift command post, a dank cellar beneath a bombed-out bakery, was thick with the smell of stale coffee, damp earth, and the nervous energy of men on the cusp of a perilous undertaking. Maps brittle with age and marked with grease pencil were spread across splintered tables, illuminated by the flickering glow of a single Coleman lantern. Lieutenant Colonel Cross, his face etched with fatigue, pointed to a section of the map depicting the Rhine River. "Operation Plunder," he announced, his voice cutting through the hushed room, "is scheduled to commence within 72 hours. Our objective is a crossing point near Wessel. Intelligence reports heavy enemy concentrations on the east bank, particularly entrenched artillery and machine gun nets." Sergeant Washington leaned forward, his eyes scanning the topographical lines. The Rhine, an artery of German industry and defense, was a formidable natural barrier. Its waters, swollen with winter melt, were fast and treacherous. Crossing it under fire would be a nightmare. He noted the placement of enemy strongholds, the likely firing lanes, the potential choke points. His mind, honed by months of combat, was already dissecting the tactical challenges, mentally assigning his squad to potential cover and firing position. "Our unit," Cross continued, "will be part of the initial wave, providing immediate beachhead security for the engineer. Your squad, Sergeant Washington, is tasked with neutralizing the anti-personnel defenses along Sector Gamma, likely concertina wire and minefields, and establishing an initial foothold for the follow-on platoons." Washington nodded. Dangerous work. They were to be the tip of the spear, the first to touch the enemy-held bank, the ones who would draw the initial furious response. His internal conflict churned. On one hand, pride swelled in his chest. They were trusted with a critical mission, a sign of implicit faith in their capability. On the other, a cold dread coiled around his stomach, a worry for his men. He knew the cost of such an endeavor. Later, as the full details trickled down, Washington gathered his squad in a darkened barn, the air alive with the rustle of straw and the distant rumble of artillery. Sam Thompson nervously fiddled with the strap of his M1 Garand, his brow furrowed. Bob Jones methodically checked the action on his Browning automatic rifle, his movements precise and practical. "All right, listen up," Washington began, his voice steady despite the tremor of anticipation in his own gut. "The Rhine crossing is happening. We're going in the first wave. Our objective is Sector Gamma, clearing the way for the engineers to set up a ferry point." He laid out a crudely drawn map in the dirt, tracing the river's curve with a stick. "Expect heavy fire. We'll be going in under the cover of a massive artillery barrage, but once we hit the water, it's on us." Sam gulped. "First wave, Sergeant. That means we get all the nasty surprises." "That's exactly what it means, Sam," Washington affirmed, looking each man in the eye. "It means we have to be better, faster, smarter. It means we have to prove every single one of those Kraut lies wrong." Bob spat on the ground. "Ain't nothing new there. Been doing that since North Africa." His cynicism was a coping mechanism, but beneath it, Washington saw the fierce resolve. Bob had seen the propaganda posters too. the caricatures of black soldiers as cowardly, clumsy, and unintelligent. He knew the fight was not just for territory, but for their very dignity. Washington recalled a recent incident. A white captain from another company, during a joint training exercise, had scoffed at the idea of Negro troops leading a river assault. "They'll break and run at the first sound of a German machine gun," he'd muttered within earshot, dismissing their unit's proven combat record. The memory fueled a quiet fire within Washington. They would not break. They would not run. That evening the preparations intensified. Engineers briefed them on the collapsible assault boats, the life vests, the procedure for securing ropes under enemy fire. Ammunition was distributed, meticulously counted and checked. Washington moved among his men, offering quiet words of encouragement, inspecting equipment, ensuring every detail was accounted for. He saw the fear in some eyes, the forced bravado in others, but also a deep-seated determination. "Remember what Colonel Cross said," Washington told them during their final briefing before they moved to the assembly area. "This isn't just about winning a battle, this is about winning something bigger, for our families back home, for every black man and woman who's ever been told we carry that weight, and we turn it into strength." Private Thompson, usually the quiet one, looked up, his eyes shining with a new resolve. "We ain't just fighting Germans, are we, Sergeant? We're fighting a whole lot of hate." "Exactly, Sam," Washington confirmed, placing a hand on the young soldier's shoulder. "And we're gonna win both fights." He looked out into the darkness, towards the unseen river, the Rhine, a geographical barrier, yes, but also a symbolic one. Beyond it lay not just German territory, but a chance to redefine who they were, what they were capable of in the eyes of a world that had so long underestimated them. They were preparing to cross more than just a river. They were preparing to cross a threshold of history, to tear down the walls of prejudice with their courage. Drop a like if you believe real history should celebrate all heroes, regardless of their skin color. The pre-dawn air on March 23, 1945, crackled with a nervous energy that seemed to electrify the very landscape. A deafening artillery barrage, a crescendo of thunderous explosions, erupted across the front, tearing into the German defenses on the eastern bank of the Rhine. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently as Sergeant Washington and his men boarded their flimsy assault boats. The canvas stretched taut over lightweight frames, designed for speed rather than protection. The roar of the guns was a primal scream, a prelude to the chaos that awaited them. "Keep your heads down, keep your paddles moving," Washington shouted over the din, his voice hoarse. The river was a dark, swirling mass, its surface churned by the artillery and the sheer volume of boats hitting the water. Flares arced across the sky, momentarily illuminating the scene in an eerie green glow, revealing the frantic movements of thousands of men, their faces grim and resolute. Their boat, carrying Washington, Sam, Bob and 3 other soldiers, pushed off into the frigid current. The engineers, veterans of countless river crossings, expertly guided the craft, but the sheer force of the Rhine fought them at every stroke. German machine guns, surprisingly resilient after the barrage, chattered to life, their tracers stitching fiery lines across the black water. Artillery shells, though less frequent now, still erupted with terrifying force, sending geysers of water and shrapnel skyward. "Incoming," Bob yelled, ducking low as a mortar round landed perilously close, drenching them in a wave of freezing water. Sam, his face pale, paddled with furious determination, his youthful strength pushing against the current. He remembered Washington's words, about proving them all wrong, about the fight for dignity. It fueled his every stroke. As they neared the eastern bank, the German resistance intensified. They were met with a hail of small arms fire. Washington, peering over the side of the boat, identified a machine gun nest, positioned in a half-destroyed bunker, its fire sweeping their approach. "Bob, lay down suppressing fire." "Sam, on me, we take that bunker out." Bob unslung his BR, bracing it against the boat's side, and unleashed a torrent of fire, his heavy rounds tearing into the bunker's embrasure, forcing the enemy gunner to duck. Washington, drawing his M1911 pistol, leaped out of the boat the moment its keel scraped the muddy bank. The water was waist-deep, the current trying to pull him under, but he pushed forward, his boots sinking into the soft earth. Sam, clutching his rifle, was right behind him, They scrambled onto the bank, bullets kicking up dirt around them. The German position was well fortified, barbed wire snaking across their path, anti-personnel mines lying hidden beneath the mud. Mines, Washington barked, pointing with his pistol. Watch your step. They moved with practiced caution, Washington taking the lead, his eyes scanning for tripwires and pressure plates. He spotted a gap in the wire, a narrow defile, and gestured for Sam to follow. They advanced, Bob's BAR providing crucial cover fire, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of its discharge a comforting rhythm in the symphony of war. Reaching the bunker, Washington tossed a grenade through the embrasure. A muffled explosion, followed by desperate shouts, confirmed its effectiveness. As Sam covered him, Washington kicked open the bunker door, his pistol ready. Inside, 2 dazed German soldiers surrendered, their eyes wide with fear. Washington quickly secured them, then waved the rest of his squad forward. They had established their first foothold, and not a moment too soon. More boats were landing, disgorging men who immediately began clearing the barbed wire and confirming the minefields. But the fight was far from over. German infantry, alerted to the breach, launched a counterattack from a nearby trench line. Positions, dig in, Washington yelled, directing his men to hastily prepared firing positions. The cacophony of battle swelled again, rifle fire exchanged with precise deadly intent. Washington watched as Sam, barely visible behind a fallen tree, expertly picked off a German soldier attempting to flank their position. Bob, a rock of steady fire, kept the enemy pinned, his BAR spitting flames. A German officer, rallying his troops, charged forward, bayonet fit. Washington, seeing the threat, engaged him directly. It was a brutal close-quarters struggle, a clash of steel and will. Washington's training kicked in, his movements fluid and efficient. He parried a thrust, then brought the butt of his rifle down with bone-jarring force, disarming the officer and bringing him to his knees. As the morning light slowly crept over the eastern horizon, painting the sky with the grim hues of war, the initial German counterattack was repelled. Their beachhead was secured, engineers were pouring onto the bank, and the first bridging equipment was being prepared. Washington, mud-splattered and exhausted, looked back at the river, then across the field of dead and wounded. They had crossed the Rhine, under heavy fire, proving their mettle against a determined foe. They had outpaced, outfought and outsmarted the enemy, defying every racist expectation that had been heaped upon them. Each shot fired, each advance made, was a direct refutation of Hitler's lie. The waters of destiny had been crossed, and the steel hearts of these men had indeed prevailed. What do you think about these forgotten heroes? Comment below your thoughts on how history has overlooked their courage. The sun, now fully risen, cast long weary shadows across the Rhine's eastern bank. The initial chaos of the crossing had given way to the methodical, relentless advance of the Allied forces. Engineers worked feverishly to assemble pontoon bridges, tanks rumbled across the newly secured land, and wave after wave of infantry poured into Germany. Sergeant Washington's squad, after securing their sector and enduring several smaller skirmishes, was now pushing inland, clearing pockets of resistance, their objective to secure a strategic crossroads. The fighting remained fierce, but the tide had turned. The German lines, fractured and demoralized by the sheer audacity and scale of the Allied assault, were beginning to crumble. Washington led his men through a small war-torn village, their eyes scanning every window, every alleyway, for signs of enemy snipers or last-ditch ambush. They encountered pockets of desperate resistance, young boys and old men, pressed into service, fighting with a ferocity born of desperation rather than conviction, but they were no match for the seasoned, determined American soldier. "Looks like this one's clear, Sergeant," Sam Thompson reported, his voice raspy, his rifle still warm from recent engagements. He leaned against a shattered wall, surveying the destruction. The youthful idealism he'd brought to Europe was long gone, replaced by a grim understanding of war's cost. Yet in its place, a quiet strength had blossomed, forged in the crucible of battle. He'd seen his comrades, black men like himself, perform feats of courage that would forever challenge the racist narratives he'd grown up hearing. Bob Jones wiped sweat and grime from his forehead, his uniform torn in several places. Another one down. How many more before they learn? His question was rhetorical,
directed not at his comrades, but at the world that still clung to prejudice. He'd seen the same look of surprise, sometimes even grudging respect, in the eyes of captured German soldiers, who had been fed a steady diet of propaganda. These inferior troops had outfought them. Lieutenant Colonel Cross arrived, his uniform streaked with mud, but his posture still ramrod straight. "Good work, Sergeant. Your sector is secure. We've linked up with the 17th Airborne to the north. The bridgeheads are expanding rapidly." He clapped Washington on the shoulder, a rare, but deeply felt, gesture of approval. "You and your men performed exceptionally, exceeded all expectations." Washington merely nodded, a sense of quiet accomplishment settling over him. Exceeded all expectation. The phrase resonated with a bittersweet irony. For months, years, they had been fighting not just the enemy, but the low expectations, the racist assumptions, the systematic disenfranchisement from within their own ranks. Now on German soil, having successfully executed one of the most perilous operations of the war, their actions spoke louder than any decree or propaganda leaflet. The victory at the Rhine was more than a tactical triumph. It was a profound historical statement. Hitler's racist claims, propagated through countless broadcasts and documents, painted black people as inherently unsuited for combat, lacking intelligence, discipline and courage. He believed his soldiers would easily rout them, exposing the weakness of the Allied force. But the reality on the ground, in the muddy blood-soaked fields beyond the Rhine, was a stark, brutal contradiction. Black soldiers had fought with ferocity, strategic brilliance, and an unwavering courage that matched, and often surpassed, their white counterparts. They had dismantled the racist myth, with every bullet fired, every inch of ground gained, every life saved. For James Washington, the personal impact was indelible. He had come to Europe a man accustomed to the sting of prejudice, internalizing the need to constantly prove himself. He would return a man who had not only proven himself, but had done so under the most extreme conditions, for the highest stakes. He had witnessed the transformation of young men like Sam Thompson, from uncertain recruits, to hardened, capable warriors. He had fought alongside veterans like Bob Jones, whose weary cynicism was now tempered by a quiet pride in their collective achievement. The broader historical significance of their actions would for a time be largely overshadowed by the immediate jubilation of victory and the lingering racial tensions back home. Their contributions, like those of many black units, would be minimized, or worse, erased from mainstream narrative. But for those who were there, who witnessed their valor firsthand, the truth was undeniable. They were not inferior, they were exceptional, they were not cowardly, they were heroes. Years later, sitting on his porch in Alabama, James would still vividly recall the biting wind of the Rhine, the roar of the guns, the determined faces of his men. The war had ended, and the fight for equality continued, but the lie that Hitler and others had woven about his people had been definitively shredded on the battlefields of Europe. The steel hearts of those black soldiers had not only helped crush Nazism, but had also laid an undeniable claim to their rightful place in the annals of heroism, forging a legacy that, despite efforts to obscure it, would eventually shine through. Their courage defied hatred, not just on the banks of the Rhine, but across the fabric of history itself.